Have just about everyone on so we can get started. All right, so before we dive into heuristic evaluations and design ethics, I wanted to take a second to see if there were any questions related to the assignment yesterday. Okay, awesome. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, do you all see training kit in front of you? Awesome. Okay, so, all right, yesterday we dove into designing for accessibility, and then for today, we'll be focusing on two topics. The first is, we'll start with design ethics. We're going to explain why design ethics is important. It's a pretty heavy topic that's been coming about in the UX industry. And we'll talk specifically about different patterns and how they relate to design ethics in general. And then the second piece that we have here is heuristics evaluation. So this was a topic that was touched earlier, I believe, in Unit 1. And this was during a period where some of you may not have had that design foundation. So I think this is a really great topic to go over. So in addition to the daily UIs that you all have been completing, as you've been referring to that rubric, a heuristic evaluation is also going to help you understand if there are any usability issues in your designs. So we'll talk about Nielsen's 10 heuristics, and then what we can do is we can take a look at other daily UI pieces of work that have been shared in different channels, and we'll address how it meets some of these usability principles and how some of them may not. All right, any questions before we move on? Great. All right. Okay, so design ethics for the first half of class, this is what we'll be discussing and its importance. And so some of you may or may not have heard of design ethics, but it's a topic in the UX field that's drawing more and more attention. So for example, the Norwegian Consumer Council released a report called Deceived by Design, which actually revealed how some tech companies use what we call dark patterns that mislead users to complete a task that they had no original intention to do. And we'll talk about what are dark patterns in just a little bit. But this isn't to say that designers don't care about ethics, but it's too often that these sorts of ramifications aren't taken into consideration. So as UX designer, every design decision we make impacts the experience of our users. Designing experiences is a really big job, and how we choose to design should be weighed heavily as part of our overall process and not as an afterthought. Some of you may have heard of Mike Montero. He is a design director of Mule Design, and he is a big advocate of design ethics. So if you were to ever go to his own personal website or view his Twitter account, he is someone that has written a lot about ethics and is a really, really big advocate of just ethical design states in general. But he quotes, "Designers have been running fast and free with no ethical guidelines. And that was fine when we were designing posters and sites for movies, but now design is interpersonal relationships on social media, healthcare, financial data, traveling everywhere, the difference between verified journalism and fake news, and this is dangerous." So practicing an ethical design means remaining focused on a balance between your user and business needs in order to help instill trust for your users. So earlier, we touched on this terminology that I use called dark patterns, and let's take a look at what we mean by that. So Harry Bricknell, he is the creator of a website called darkpatterns.org, and he states that it's just a matter of time before a competitor comes along who provides a better experience. If your business depends on dark patterns to succeed, you're just leaving yourself open to being disrupted. So what are dark patterns? A dark pattern is an interface that intentionally guides a user to a specific action that they don't want to take. So they tend to fall under these three categories. The first is known as confirm shaming. The second is known as disguised ads. And the third is known as a roach model. So let's take a look at each one in more detail. And what we'll be referencing is darkpatterns.org in terms of the definition. Their website, if you happen to browse it at the end of this module or during your free time, there are additional categories. So it's not just these three. These three are pretty common in terms of what I've seen out there, but there are a lot more that can be taken into consideration. Before we dive into the details of each of these categories, I just wanted to check in and see if there were any questions on design ethics, why it's so important that we instill this in our work day to day. Okay, awesome. All right, so this first one that we have here, according to darkpatterns.com, we have confirm shaming. So this is the act of guilting someone into opting into something. For example, the option to decline is worded in such a way as to shame the user into compliance. The most common use case for this is to get a user to sign up for a mailing list, like we see on the right-hand side. So we have this free beginner's garden guide, and this confirmed shaming often appears as exit intent modals, or they may also appear as pop-ups. And in this example, we see that confirmed shaming is used to guilt users to discourage them from opting out. So if we take a look and draw our attention to the link on the bottom, if I were a user and I chose not to move forward to sign up for my free guide, the only way that I would be able to exit this experience is to tap on no thanks, I know everything about gardening. That is not the type of emotion that we want to convey to someone. We don't ever want to make someone feel guilty. And so there are much more human ways and friendly ways to adjust the wording that we see here. And it could just be as simple as simplifying that to no thanks. Questions on confirm shaming? Have any of you ever noticed these types of modals appear in your experience?
Yes, they're so annoying.
It makes you feel a little bad for a split second, a little frustrating, right?
The one that I see the most is like, no, I don't want free whatever, you know,
Yeah,
if it's asking you to like sign up for a newsletter discount or something.
Yeah, definitely. Like, no, I don't want that free sample or something.
yeah.
How does this work within the company itself? So like the product manager and then like stakeholders, who approves this kind of weird, I don't know, it's just so bizarre to me.
Yeah, that will vary. That will really vary. It could be copy from the copywriter that makes it into production. It could have been a meeting that they had with a stakeholder, a VP, who says, no, we should actually modify the language to this. So it's difficult to determine where the source exactly comes from, but I think a lot of that is just driven by the company and its company culture. So it's hard to say, you know, who really is at fault. So as designers, you know, when we're creating work and things like this happen, we almost need to take a step back and really truly ask why, and make sure that we're providing the best possible experience to our users, because this is being seen out in the world and it has our name on it. So we don't want to have this reflect poorly on ourselves.
Right.
Cool. Well, you did notice I have this example from confirmshaming.tumblr.com. So if you were interested in viewing more, that is a link that you can view, and I'm happy to share that at the end of the module. All right. Oh,
question.
Sure.
What if you're like working for a company and they want to do this and it's something that like you bring up, but they're not receptive to changing it?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is really tricky. If you ever read one of Mike Montero's book, I actually have one sitting right in front of me that I was referencing called Ruined by Design. He talks a lot about that. And he always goes back to, it's really our responsibility to stand up and say something. So in his book, it even goes as far as, standing up and potentially speaking out loud your thoughts, and potentially that could risk your job in a way. But what I would always recommend is always ask why, always provide alternatives. If there's additional testing that you can do, so if you were to present this option, another option, if you're able to video record reactions, those are really helpful to set context to the user or to the stakeholders, because you were ultimately the one designing this experience, and they're not the ones in and out of doing this day to day. So the more that we can provide context, the more that we can show that this is not the right approach through research, that should build a foundation to help them understand the direction that they truly should be moving towards.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the second category is called disguised ads. And this is when the user is unsure if it's a real button or an ad. Sometimes you may have seen that advertisements are disguised as other kinds of content or navigation in order to get you to click on them. And this is an example that was pulled from darkpatterns.org, from Softopedia. I don't know how recent this is, but if we draw our attention to the image, Softopedia is a popular software download site, and one of their sources of revenue is to display advertising. So they'll often run advertisements that look like a download button, tricking users into clicking on the ads rather than getting the things that they wanted. And in this screen grab, if we pay attention to the items that are highlighted in this pink rectangle, we see that those are actually ads. These are not buttons. These are actually may redirect us to a completely different experience. And if we draw our attention to where it says download under Onyx for Mac, that is the actual true download button. That is what that is the button that the user should be clicking on, but they may be misdirected by these additional advertisements that we see highlighted in these pink rectangles. Questions on disguised ads? This is also a really good example based on the module that we reviewed yesterday. We keep talking about using existing conventions. So we talked briefly about how Sarita and myself both had problems with the power button on this new Mac. It broke the existing convention that we were used to seeing this power button with the power icon. And this is another example of how conventions are broken. So we think that this download now is actually a button for us to submit an action, but instead it's redirecting us. And so this is used in a poor manner, which is going to create more frustration for the user. All right, so this final category is called a roach model. And this means that the interface makes it uneasy for the user to cancel a subscription. As darkpatterns.org states, the design makes it very easy for you to get into a certain situation, but then makes it hard for you to get out of it. So for example, if you are paying for a subscription and you're having a really difficult time trying to stop paying for a particular subscription, the interface is really difficult to navigate. Perhaps maybe the application or website is set up where you have to call customer service in order to get out of a subscription. So ticket sales sites like Live Nation and Ticketmaster, they are guilty or have in the past been guilty of engaging in this roach this Roach model, and also known as a Roach Motel. But they've been guilty in engaging in this model for a number of years. When purchasing some types of tickets, they try to sneak a subscription to a magazine, so typically Rolling Stone or Entertainment Weekly. And so they add this into your basket via a trick question on the checkout page. And the example that we see here is one from Royal Mail Group. We see that there's a list of options that are selected, so the post, telephone, email, SMS. But if we read closely at the first paragraph, unless you're being very detailed, you may not have noticed that last sentence. So actually, let's read the second. Let's read the second sentence. So click on the register button to submit this form and indicate your consent to receive marketing communications by post, phone, email, text, and other electronic means. If you do not wish to receive such communications, please tick the relevant boxes below. So this is another interface where it makes it really difficult for a user to uncheck these boxes. Most of the time, just generally speaking, how readers read a page, they're typically scanning. And so they might have missed this and might have thought that they have opted out of these promotional vehicles. So this is another example of a Roach model, or also known as a Roach Motel. Questions on this?
Yeah, it's a pretty asshole move right there. Like, you don't click anything because you don't want anything, but in reality, you actually want stuff where you don't click on them.
It's very manipulative in a way.
That's scummy. Wow.
But these sorts of things happen, and I don't think that we spend enough time talking about it. So I think this is a good module to review and just something to think back as you're designing out your experiences.
So who do you think approves this? Like the manager that wants to retain people, or something like this, something like that?
It could be. Again, I wouldn't. It's hard to say who that responsibility really falls on, but I would honestly revert it back to the designer. Let's say they were working with a copywriter. Whenever you are working with a developer, that developer is going to have actual copy and the actual interfaces. So it's really important that, it's difficult to tell whose fault really is, but things like this do fall on the designer, just because this is the work that they're producing. And that's a theme that's covered a lot in Mike Montero's Ruined by Design. So it could be everyone, but in the end, if you're the one creating the mock-up, it could fall on you. All right. Other questions about dark patterns?
I just have a comment. So in my current job, actually, I'm working with a smart home company, and I just work in a call center. And we have a lot of sales reps that call in, and they're kind of using methods similar to this to get their sales to go through. And customers notice it, and and I've noticed that the honest and the really upfront sales reps that are upfront about their tactics, or not their tactics, but they're just honest, right? They have a lot more success because customers can sense it, and they can see that. And I think a similar thing applies to design, where you're like, if we're upfront about our intentions and aren't like manipulative or anything to get more clicks or views or sales or anything, I think it definitely shows through, and people notice that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with that. And that is a really great analogy. That goes with everything that you put out there in the world, how you interact with people, how you write your emails, how you're designing your interfaces. People will be able to read and interpret whether you're being sincere or whether you are trying to trick them. And that's important to think about, and to really make sure that your work reflects the best interests of your users, and that it's also a reflection on you.
I had a really awful experience Well, my mother and I both did. It was like a shopping site, like for clothing. You would like have you could have a VIP membership or whatever, and basically they'd take a certain amount of money out of your account every month, and then you'd get like a discount on all their clothes, and all the money that like went into your account you would use to like spend on this site. But eventually I got to a point where, and I was like recommending it to people because the deals were good. But then I got to a point where I couldn't afford to like keep paying for the site. So I went to unsubscribe. And they made it like freaking impossible. I ended up having to like call them because there was nowhere on the site to be able to do that. And then when I called them, they were like fighting with me about like canceling my account and stuff. And I was like, you're making it so that like before this experience, I might have signed up with you again, but because you've made it impossible for me to back out of it, like I never want to interact with you again. And like since then I've warned like everyone I've known who is like a little bit interested about it. And I'm like, dang, like they lost a lot of customers because of that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a really great example. When you think back to your module around customer journey maps, like these are the things you're always thinking about your experience from a customer's perspective and understanding what their entire journey is going to be like. Your experience in the beginning could be wonderful and great, like Kelsey and her mother experience. But if part of that journey makes it really difficult for them to unsubscribe, and furthermore, from a customer service perspective, it just doesn't feel as great as it could have been. That is a really disheartening experience for users. So we always got to not only think about design ethics, but also think big picture. What is every step of the journey going to look like from A all the way to Z? And that's a great example of that. Thanks, Kelsey. Mm-hmm. All right. So we talked, for the first half hour about design ethics and the things that could go wrong and the things to avoid. So in order to make sure that we're practicing good ethical design, we can refer to this resource called Humane by Design. And they focus on building out ethically humane digital experiences. So when we're completing our day-to-day, we can refer back to these guidelines to make sure that we're taking responsibility for the products that we're building. Now, Humane by Design focuses on these 6 principles, and these are guidelines that we can consider when it comes to focusing on the well-being of our users. And so let's take a closer look at each one. All right, so these examples are pulled by humanebydesign.com. I'm happy to share the URL at the end of the module. It's also available for in training kit for you to click on. But this first principle out of 6 is meant to be focused on empowering design. So making sure that empowering design ensures that our products center on the value that they provide to people over the revenue that it generates. And one way that we can empower design is by giving people control. So for example, giving people the ability to manage their algorithms that shape their experiences. A second principle that we can follow under empowering is privacy and anonymity. So giving people the control to be able to manage their privacy and be able to remain anonymous. Invisible until needed. Technology should be used to augment human ability without disrupting our lives. And then lastly, promoting awareness, promoting usage awareness to encourage healthier digital habits. So one feature that comes to mind that I've seen in Instagram that they've added in is promoting healthier habits, tracking how much time you're using on the application. So that could fall under that category of promoting awareness. Questions on this first principle of empowering design?
you go a little bit deeper into invisible until needed? Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this focuses on making sure that our technology is serves as more of a assistive technology. So when I think about invisible until needed, one example that comes to mind is, let's say, Siri. Siri is a technology that augments our human ability without disrupting our lives, I hope. So we use that technology when needed. It isn't talking out loud and disrupting us. Another example could be notifications, which I think is also covered by another principle. But again, not utilizing notifications to distract us from day to day, that it's actually helping us. So thinking about event notifications that I've set up, using that to set that as a reminder to help me rather than having constant notifications that are meaningless that disrupt my day to day. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? All right. So we'll move on to the second principle called finite. And finite design maximizes the overall quality of time spent by bounding the experience and prioritizing meaningful and relevant content. So when I go through these subcategories, a lot of this, again, reminds me of social media sites like Facebook and Instagram. So this first subcategory is all caught up, using an indicator to inform users when they're caught up to help curb zombie scrolling. So again, thinking back to this Instagram experience as you continue to scroll. This next one is called load more. So providing a better alternative to infinite scrolling is to explicitly lay out a button or some sort of text that says load more content. And then we have autoplay. Autoplay videos prevent users from making a conscious choice. A better alternative is to require an explicit action to prevent harmful binge watching. This is something that I've noticed with Netflix recently, not on their mobile application, but when I'm watching it on my monitor, TV monitor, that videos will autoplay rather than me going in and explicitly saying, you know, this is something that I want to watch. Questions on this principle?
I feel like autoplay is opposite of finite. So
Well, you got Netflix that every 3 episodes it stops and says, "Hey, you still there?"
how many episodes?
Every 3.
3 episodes. Oh, I didn't.
So if you watch 3 episodes in a row,
Mm-hmm.
and when the 4th comes, it tells you, "Hey, you still there? Still watching?"
It's hilarious. But I can see how All Caught Up and Load More are finite, and they're helping you realize, okay, you're going into like scroll zone or zombie zone. Autoplay actually could put you into the zombie zone. So if you could clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly right. So autoplay can put you into that zombie mode. Yeah.
Okay.
So thinking about Netflix, where I'm just exploring different television shows or movies, it will start autoplaying, and then I'm already at the point where I become interested and almost attached, and I say, hey, like maybe this is something that I should watch. So yes, autoplay would be follow along with that, almost like similar to zombie scrolling.
Okay. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so this third principle is inclusive design. And we talked a lot about this yesterday when we went over our module for designing for accessibility. So there will be overlap between the two, which is great. And inclusive design is a methodology that enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. This first piece is called Extended Solve. And Extended Solve is a design solution that focuses on an excluded, disabled, or impaired group of users can benefit all users. For example, closed captions on videos for deaf or hard of hearing users can be helpful for those in an environment with a lot of background noise. So think of Extended Solve as almost, again, more like an assistive tool. And then secondly, we have give control. It's critical that we provide users control so that they can access and interact with content in ways that they prefer. For example, don't disable platform features such as zoom, contrast, and font size and settings, and enable the ability to turn off things like parallax scrolling, animations, and infinite scrolling. Questions on inclusive design? This next principle, respective design, this means prioritizing people's time, attention, and overall digital well-being. And this really resonates with me. I know from day to day, we constantly see people on their devices. Sometimes it's really hard to step away from the computer when you have Slack notifications coming in. And you know, some of us feel like our lifelines are tied to these tiny devices that we have to carry with us each day. So the first subcategory is aligning delivery with urgency. For example, not every notification that you build into your application or experience is an urgent one. The method in which we deliver a notification should align with its importance to minimize distraction. And then the second piece that we have is allowing for personalization. So thinking about the ability to customize your experience based on what you feel most comfortable with, being able to create this experience where it's allowing you to feel like you have control. And then respect and adapting to context. Just as humans understand when and how it's appropriate to communicate with one another in context, technology should respect and adapt to user context. So to look at this in a deeper level, think about your experiences as if you were designing for a conversation. If you are designing an experience where, let's say you are creating a food delivery app, and every single day at 12, we're sending a notification to let you know that you can receive some sort of deal or to inform you of the latest restaurant that has opened up in your nearby location. That could be really disruptive. If you apply that in a real life scenario, let's say you had a real human being every single day pinging you or texting you or calling you, that could get really annoying after a certain number of days. So just making sure that the way that you're building out your interfaces is always thinking through the context of the users and always thinking back to, well, what would this be like if this were a real conversation? Is this notification necessary? Could it be disruptive? Questions on respectful design. All right. This next one is thoughtful design, and thoughtful design uses friction to prevent abuse, protect privacy, and steer people towards healthier digital habits. This first piece is called manual speed bumps. So using things like confirmation dialogues to help prevent error, avoid unintentional actions, and promote critical thought. And an example that comes to mind is we frequently see confirmation dialogues, and that is something that we'll touch on in Nielsen's 10 heuristics. But we'll frequently see these types of dialogues to make sure that what we're committing to is the action that we would like to take. For instance, if we think about Google, and we'll also use this as an example in just a bit, Google, when you compose an email and you were to send it, let's say you sent it by accident or maybe you forgot something, they help prevent error by presenting some sort of toast message on the bottom or some sort of alert to ask you if you would like to undo that. So making sure that we're being intentional with that and we're always giving the user the ability to recover from their errors. And then the second piece is encouraging moderation. So when we encourage moderation, oh, that should be moderation, not motivation, we give people the tools that they can use to keep their viewing habits in check. So things that come to mind in relationship to encouraging moderation is sometimes there are applications that we can download on our devices that actually keep us in check. They monitor how much we're using our phones, how much we're using certain applications to remind us, maybe spending 2 hours on Facebook may not be the best use of your time and that you could be doing something that might be a little bit more valuable. Questions on thoughtful design? All right. And then we have transparent design. Transparent design falls along with what we were showcasing earlier with dark patterns. And it's all about making sure that we're being clear with our intentions, that we're being honest, and that we're not utilizing dark patterns to convince people to do things that they are not originally intending to do. So there are a few here. The first one here is right to know. So users have a right to know exactly what they're signing up for when deciding to use a product. Make it clear and specific. And a good example of this are websites who offer these free subscriptions, or a great example of that is Kelsey's experience where she was trying to unsubscribe and it wasn't made exactly clear to her of what she needed to do to deactivate that account. So just being straightforward as to how the process works. The second one is data transparency. Being able to communicate exactly what data is being collected and why it's being collected. So I think this is something that I've seen in Facebook, I believe it's in Facebook, where they talk about what they're actually tracking and that you have also the ability to download your data as well, which actually falls in line with this third piece here, access to data, giving users access to the data that's being collected on them and ensure that it's easy for them to find. The right to be forgotten, being able to provide users the ability to permanently delete their data and ensure it's easy to find. So right along with this idea of access to data. Ensuring that we're avoiding misdirection. So we can avoid misdirecting users by following usability best practices, which we'll talk about for the second half of this lesson. Maintaining consistent UI, making sure that we follow existing conventions. Ensuring links and buttons are clear and recognizable and not disguising ads as content. So thinking back to the dark pattern example that we were looking at, where this category of disguised ads, just not making sure that if you're using a button, the intention is a button and not to redirect that user to a completely different experience that they were not expecting. And then finally, we have easy exit, just making sure that users can easily find the option to unsubscribe or delete their account if they choose to do so. All right. What questions do we have about transparent design? Okay. And so what general questions do we have about any of these ethical design principles? All right. And just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you were familiar with design ethics in the past.
Not the whole thing, but like some aspects of it, like the roach method or fake download buttons. I mean, I would cut those everywhere. Things like that. I was familiar with it.
Awesome. Cool. Great. So I saw a few hands. Awesome. All right. So what I encourage you all to do is, oh, hold on, I have one more slide before I showcase that. All right, so just to wrap up our, let me show you the right page. Okay, so just to wrap up this discussion on design ethics, this is a quote from Victor Papanek. He was a designer and educator who was a strong advocate of ethical design. And he once said, "You are responsible for what you put into the world, and you are responsible for the effects those have upon the world." And so being a UX designer, it's a fun and challenging job, but there are also things that we need to be mindful of as we're designing our experiences. So I hope by sharing these different types of dark patterns and good ethical design practices will stay with you as you continue to progress throughout your UX design career. Awesome. All right. So if you'd like to read more about Humane by Design, there is available in training kit. So I've gone ahead and actually added in all the images. They weren't there before, but if you'd like to refer back to them, they are here. But if you go into Humane by Design, this is our website, which is beautifully put together. And with the examples that I talked about, if you'd like to go back, they also have everything that we've discussed, but there's additional screen visualizations that you can refer to see specifically what we talked about. And then there are additional resources that they have. So if you're interested in learning more about design ethics, they have recommended websites and articles, and a book that I mentioned earlier that I've read by Mike Montero, Ruined by Design, was very eye-opening. And he also shares, I believe it's on Medium, he has his own personal account where he talks about just UX design in general, but how we can be better designers in the world. Okay, all right. So next, we're going to move into heuristic evaluation. And what I would like to do is let's take a little bit of an earlier break so that way we can focus on the second half of class. And so I am going to put 5 minutes on the timer, and so grab something to drink, and we'll be back to discuss heuristic evaluation. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so next we're going to move into a heuristic evaluation. And this was a topic that was touched on in Unit 1, if you think back to early on in the UX curriculum. And I think that the heuristic evaluation is going to be really relevant at this point. Now that we've touched on design theory, now that we've actually created interface and we understand the principles that go behind it, another way that we can evaluate our design is through reviewing these usability guidelines. And actually, as I was going through the guided project recently, what I was doing was pulling student work from other cohorts. And it was really helpful in that I was able to think beyond just the visual design rubric, but just touching on the core of UX design, making sure that everything truly reflected good usability practices. So we'll run through these 10 principles, these 10 guidelines. I'll have an example for each one that we can refer back to. And then we'll end with class reviewing this work. And if we have extra time, we can also take a look at your Build Week projects and apply these principles and see if they meet these guidelines as well. All right, can you all see my screen? Okay, awesome. All right, so as a refresher, heuristic evaluation is going to help you evaluate the usability of an existing website or app. And this product can be one that you're working on, or perhaps maybe you're evaluating a competitor. After heuristic evaluation is conducted, typically what will take place is a list of potential usability issues. And the key thing to think about when it comes to heuristic evaluations is that this is not meant to replace usability testing. It's designed to provide a quick and easy way to obtain feedback early on in the design process. One way that I've used heuristic evaluations in my previous design roles is if we were to work on a redesign of an older product, I would go ahead and conduct my own heuristic evaluation of usability problems that just plainly stuck out and were things that I needed to address. And I would supplement that with usability testing to also make sure that there was alignment between what I had seen and what people were, and how people were responding to that particular interface. It's also a great way when you're conducting competitor research to perform a heuristic evaluation, see if there are things missing your design that is common in your competitors, or vice versa. So this idea of a heuristic evaluation was coined by Jacob Nielsen and Rolf Malik in 1990. And typically the heuristic evaluation is performed where there are evaluators that will go through a checklist, they'll examine an interface, and they'll compare it against what we call Nielsen's 10 heuristics. So as we take a deeper dive into each of these usability guidelines, just think of them as general 10 rules of thumb that you can follow as you are evaluating an interface. All right, so this first one here is visibility of system status. This means that the system or your interface should always keep users informed about what's going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. A good example of this is a component that we had reviewed last week or 2 weeks ago, where we had progress indicators. Similar nature to what we see here on the right-hand side, an example of Google Drive showing the status of a document upload. If we didn't have this, users might be confused. They might not know what exactly is taking place. So imagine this experience as if we didn't have this progress indicator. It's important that throughout our experiences that we continue to keep users informed, let them know where they are in their process. Questions on this first principle? Great. Second principle, match between system and the real world. So our interfaces should speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts familiar to the user rather than using jargon. We should be following real world conventions, making information appear in a natural and logical order. In this example on the right-hand side, MailChimp could have very well said sign up on the landing page, but instead they chose to explain what they do in human copy in order to help set the context for the user that's arriving on their page. And then typically, if we take a look at the navigation bar, they are using languages such as login and sign up free. Again, following real world conventions, making sure that everything is logically placed. And that is a great example of how we can make sure that we follow this principle of the match between system and the real world. Questions on the second principle? This third principle of user control and freedom. So oftentimes, users will interact with an interface and perform a function by mistake. And it's important that we clearly give users the ability to leave an unwanted state and helping them support this idea of undo and redo. This was an example I touched on earlier, but this can be illustrated by Gmail's message that appears on the top. So in the event that we've deleted an email, and let's say that was an error, we have this notification that appears that allows us to undo that. Questions on user control and freedom? Okay. So fourth piece here is consistency and standards that we've talked a lot about. So users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. And we should be following platform conventions. Consistency is really important in your designs. For example, here are two different buttons that appear, and in this example, I should have made it a little bit more detailed, but let's assume that these were submit buttons. We should not have different colors representing different submit buttons. So for instance, using red and using blue, we need to make sure that there's consistency and cohesiveness in our designs. Questions on consistency and standards? So as I go through the principles, I think it would also be helpful to think about your own individual Build Week project. So this is a really good example, thinking back to how your components and patterns are set up, making sure that you're sticking with one style guide. And if you have questions, just feel free to unmute yourself. All right, so next we have error prevention. Even better than good error messages is a careful design which prevents a problem from occurring in the first place. Either eliminate error-prone conditions or check for them and present users with a confirmation option before they commit to the action. And here is an example of Google search that is trying to correct my spelling on cookies. So rather than having me just tap enter and have the search results and correct search results appear, they've already anticipated my problem and have tried to solve for it by underlining this in this red squiggly line to let me know that that word has been spelled incorrectly. Sometimes in our designs, we'll often see are you sure? For example, if you're submitting a form, perhaps, and it's a lengthy form, perhaps maybe there is a dialogue or a modal that appears that says, are you sure you'd like to submit this form with a yes or cancel button? Questions on error prevention? Cool. Okay, so moving on quickly, we have recognition rather than recall. And what this really means is that we need to minimize the user's memory load by making objects, actions, and options visible. The user shouldn't have to remember information from one part of the dialogue to another. Instructions for use of the system should be visible or easily retrievable whenever appropriate. And this is an example of InVision It's a little difficult to see, but on the top where you see the magnifying glass, that is where I've entered in what I am specifically looking for. So I've entered in design, and here we have Envision suggesting possible blogs based on what I am trying to type. So this is allowing me to pick topics of interest from a list of options rather than asking me to type and then view all of the options that are listed. So this is a really great example of just reducing cognitive load, taking the time to provide options so that it's easily retrievable on my end. Questions on recognition rather than recall? Okay. Then we have flexibility and efficiency. And this means that we need to allow our interfaces to cater to both inexperienced and experienced users. For example, giving users the ability to tailor frequent actions. And this example can be seen while installing a new software that asks if the user wants to go ahead with the default installation or custom installation. In this view, an advanced user chooses a custom installation under advanced settings to cut out the unnecessary services. So this example is pulled from Exchange on an example of setting up Exchange on Android, where they are hiding these complex features under these advanced settings. Questions on flexibility and efficiency? All right. Next one, aesthetic and minimalist design. This we've talked a lot about over the last few weeks. So our interfaces shouldn't contain information that is irrelevant or rarely needed. Every unit of information that you add onto your page is going to compete with other sections of information. So we need to make sure that we are focusing on highlighting what's going to be most important to our user. For example, Google is a really great example of aesthetic and minimalist design. They're only showing what is absolutely necessary, which is that search bar and the Google search and those other links that also reside there. There are no additional advertisements. This is drastically different than what we see with Yahoo's search engine, where there's sports news, there's perhaps even additional advertisements. It's been a while since I've seen Yahoo's not Google site, but search site. But if you conduct your own search, you could see that they are a site that does not focus so much on aesthetics and minimalist design in comparison to Google. All right, questions on this principle or this guideline?
How minimal can something be?
It depends what your user's goals are.
Okay.
A good way to, so it's a fine balance. Sometimes you can create designs that are just super minimal and it doesn't provide enough information, and that's not what we want our user to experience. But it's always thinking back to what those product requirements are. What are the user's goals? What are they looking to accomplish? And just highlighting those pieces. And then for additional sections, making sure that they are discoverable. So I don't have an answer as to how minimal can something be. It's all going to be dependent on the features that you're looking to implement and what your user's goals are. But what I would recommend is, as an approach, you can always build upon it. So try this in your next design exercise. When you're working on an experience, add what you feel is absolutely necessary, and then build on top of that if you need to. And that should help you keep in mind this framework of this aesthetic and minimalist design.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other questions on this principle? Okay. All right, so we have help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. Error messages should be expressed in plain language and precisely indicate the problem and constructively suggest a solution. So this very much falls in line with one of the universal design principles that we reviewed yesterday. So here's another example of how Basecamp is handling this scenario, where I have entered in susanjones@email.com. They have let me know that they could not find that email address and have asked if I want to enter in another one in order to sign in. Questions on this principle? All right, and then lastly, we have help and documentation. So best case scenario, your interfaces are set up so that your user will not need to refer to documentation. But at certain points, it may be necessary to provide help. And if that is so, your information should be easy to search. It should be focused on the user's task. There should be concrete steps listed out. And an example that we have here is Figma's Help Center. So we see that there's the ability to search for what I am trying to look for. They even list suggestions in the placeholder text. So if you could see that tiny detail there where it says search component styles, prototyping, and more, they're even helping us with what we could begin to search for. And then in addition to that, if we look at the bottom, Figma includes additional categories. So there are way more than 5. This is just a screenshot of one section of the page, but this also helps the user find documentation that they may need. Questions on this guideline? Cool. All right, so in terms of a heuristic evaluation, just remember, again, this is going to be helpful in terms of inspecting your design, but it is not meant to replace usability testing. All right, so what I thought would be helpful as part of our guided project for the rest of class is taking a look at different daily UI samples from students in other cohorts and just evaluating their work based on these principles. As part of your assignment, which we'll go into more detail later, you will be asked to pull 3 screenshots that violate these usability principles and 3 screenshots that show good usability practices. So this is a good exercise just to get into this thought process of how we can evaluate interfaces. So I will bring your attention over to our guided project. And let me go ahead and share the link in the channel. Okay. And you all should see this. So I have a bunch of screens that I've selected. They're all on different pages. Again, this is all real work that I think would really resonate with us. And I'll go through the first one. And actually, I'll go through the first couple, and then what we can do is we can work individually on maybe the last 3 or 2, and then meet as a group and talk about what are the things that you were able to define and see in those particular mockups based on Nielsen's 10 usability principles. Okay, so this first screen that I have here, the way that I would normally conduct a heuristic evaluation, you may find, in Unit 1, it was set up a little bit differently where you had, it's structured where you were listing it out by severity. So I believe you had numbers 1 through 4, but there is another way to just quickly conduct a usability analysis. So just referring back to the guidelines that we reviewed, what I would do in this case is just review the screen that I have in front of me. And from there, I would start thinking about referring back to Nielsen's heuristic principles. Now, there are a few that stick out here that actually meets good usability principles. And the first one that really stands out is thinking about this idea of meeting consistency and standards. So again, meeting consistency and standards, meaning that you're using existing conventions. So you see through the use of the icons and even the chevrons that there is this cohesiveness. We're not randomly showcasing a different colored chevron on the top here and a completely different button on the bottom here. There's also this idea of matching between system and the real world. So this interface speaks in the user's language and appears in logical order. For instance, this type of terminology is common and what we would see in settings. For example, notifications, subscriptions, login. We're not reinventing the wheel and calling notifications something completely different. We're not calling login, again, something that is not familiar to the user. And the way that the information is structured is that it should be focused in on what is going to be probably contextually most important to the user when they arrive on the screen for the first time. So when they arrive in their settings, perhaps they do want to look into adjusting their notifications, their subscription, but then delete account is deprioritized towards the bottom because that is a feature that might be less likely used by somebody that is accessing this page for the first time. Another usability principle that comes to mind is flexibility and efficiency of use. So in the example that I showcased earlier was the Android screen where somebody was trying to set up Exchange. And what they had done was separated the sign-in from the advanced settings. In this case, the way that settings is structured is that they're not listing, or at least I think, that they're not listing every single option that appears on this page. And then in addition to that, folks that are probably more advanced and want to be able to customize particular features have the ability to do so. So perhaps maybe they want to go ahead and manage the privacy that is available for them to use, where somebody who may not care, it's there for them to use, but they do not need to go any further. A fourth principle that stands out is aesthetic and minimalist design. So what I see here that I see entry-level designers guilty of doing is that this is a very clean and minimalist design where there are components that are not competing with one another. We're using the same colors, the same weights in terms of its iconography. Everything that is presented feels necessary and needed in the settings. And then a fifth usability principle that I see here is help and documentation. So in the settings feature, we see a help section to help that user find what they're looking for in the event that they're running into a particular challenge or issue. Questions on the evaluation that was just conducted for this particular screen?
What do you think of the login button here? Because under settings, isn't it, it doesn't really follow normal conventions, right?
It looks like a power button, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really great eye, Nora. So I actually missed this. So now that I'm taking a closer look, this wouldn't feel consistent with other iconography that we see used with this button, especially in the example that we were looking at a few days ago or yesterday with the Mac keyboard. So this would be something that I would feel voids a particular usability guideline, which is that match between system and the real world. And I might replace that with something that represents less of a power icon, maybe another sort of icon that would be helpful to that user so that they know that this is a login button if they were to not read the text. Cool.
I'm also thrown off because the tag by the subscription looks like it's a solid black, and except for the delete account, everything is like a dark gray, and it makes me wonder if like there's something significant about that.
Yes, great eye. So breaking that consistency where everything else is this dark gray, like Kelsey pointed out. I have to assume that maybe this was an error on their part. But something as subtle as this will stand out to your users. So I love that you called that out, just making sure that there is consistency with color, because yes, this definitely looks like that this may carry more weight in comparison to the other sections. Great. Anything else that stands out to folks?
It's the privacy icon. I've seen that for like banking. Is it like a privacy icon?
Yeah, so I have not seen this as a privacy icon. What I normally recommend to folks that are using iconography is that it's really, really difficult just to rely on icons without any sort of text. So if we were to move that privacy icon to the bottom for whatever reason, that might be confusing and a sore point to users. What I like to recommend is that if you are using icons, and this kind of goes a little outside of the usability practices, but still good to think about is we're focused on UI design, is that you should always try to keep labels with your icons, or if it's something that is really recognizable like a home button, those are always really great just to test and make sure that you're following your user's mental model. But to your point, Ivan, I have not seen this type of building used as a privacy icon. And it could very well be suited to show something else.
In that vein, I feel like the help icon is also really vague. Like a question mark or something would make more sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
It's like anything.
It could be anything, yeah.
I immediately think of like deliveries or packages or, yeah, I don't know, something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I would say what really makes the most sense to me are the notifications. So keeping with consistency, the notification icon, subscription I could see even though it should be a lighter hue. About and delete. So these are common conventions that I've seen. I would agree that the login, the privacy, and the help, there could be a better iconography choice. And then with the plus button, sometimes that's really difficult, especially if we're just looking at a screenshot. This is unclear to me as to what would take place.
I had this in my project, my Build Week project, and people really didn't know what to do with it. So I'm very careful with pluses now.
That's a great example of that. Thank you for sharing that, Nora. Excuse me. Great. All right. We have 4 more. Let's take a look at the next one. Let's work together as a group on this. Okay. So we have this screenshot a student put together, which appears to look like someone's profile. And almost like a resume, if we take a look at some of the options that are displayed out, recommend to a friend, description that they're a product designer, and then their skill set, which focuses a lot on some of the things that we've touched on in the curriculum, and then the ability to message JSON. So based on some of the Nielsen principles that we've touched on, what are some things that stand out to you that either violate or support these usability principles?
I mean, the first thing I saw was the stars. They're wonky. You see on the rating on the top where the one on the left is actually the blank one.
Mhm.
And it doesn't seem like the spacing is the same as the other one. Just disturbs my eyes for some reason.
I was gonna say the same thing about the star for favorite, and then I realized after she zoomed in, it's a whole
It's the
interaction.
same star.
Yeah, and it's the same star.
Yeah. Great.
And it's like so far away from that word that it looks like two separate things, especially when you zoom out because you can't even see the line. I can't see the line. I don't know if everybody else can, but I can't see the line right there unless you zoom all the way in.
Christina,
They're
which
pretty
line?
thin.
Huh?
Which line are you referring to?
The line around, it's like a box.
Oh, the
around
box.
Favorite, yeah. And I can't see that unless you zoom all the way in. So I just thought that it was just a star just hanging out by itself next to the word favorite for some reason.
So definitely opportunity and color contrast here.
You zoom out again, please?
Yeah.
Another thing that catches my eye is the content within the buttons below Jason's skills. I feel like they should pop out more, whether put it in medium or bold.
Oh my God, all the buttons are different sizes and spaced differently apart.
Yes.
Wow, yeah.
And
Every single button is different.
they use different fonts as well.
That's what I was going to say.
Typeface, sorry.
Yeah. Did they? I can't. It's so small. I can't. Really.
Yeah, you got a serif font.
That's what I'm saying, like that.
For the description and censor for all the buttons and names. Like only serif font on the description. That's it. The rest is sans serif.
I love where he's going with this, but as well, I feel like there's no need to have that line right above "Talk with Jason" button, since I feel like a float would do it enough.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the Talk with Jason button, I don't know whether I'm going to be instant messaging him or if I'm like sending him an email or if I'm calling him, or I just feel like
leaving
that.
him a little message or something.
Yeah, like I feel like it's trying to like tell you, but it's actually kind of vague. How you're contacting him.
Yeah. And I'm always scared of accidental phone calls. And so I would be very frightened to press that button if I didn't want to call him.
Just talk to him.
I'm like, what kind of an interaction am I signing up for here?
You hit that button and the phone starts ringing like, oh no.
I like they have the X button on top. That tells you can just get out of this page really quickly. This is pretty visible, but I'm not sure about the 3 dots on the right. Like, I don't understand what they mean.
I think that's a menu.
A menu for like the previous page.
It's dangerous though, putting it.
It could be settings. Yeah. Also, it's kind of small.
Yeah.
Both of them, both the X
yeah,
and
like
the
the X and the menus are kind of small.
But it's kind of dangerous too, putting it right on where the time and date.
Yeah, because it looks like it also looks like it's part of the picture.
Yeah.
Too.
So a lot of great things that came out of this. So this falls in line with this one of the Gestalt principles, where these stars feel very separated out from this particular star. So this idea of match between system and the real world, not really being consistent, placing a heavy emphasis on having the user trying to understand, are these different? Why is this outlined and why is this colored? Other things that you all pointed out, yes, this X and this little hamburger menu. So typically, this looks like that it's supposed to be a modal given the little close button, and typically we would just leave this close button and not add an additional interaction. So we don't want layers on top of layers. I would actually remove this to prevent confusion and just leave it as a close button in itself. Christina had pointed out the contrast. So originally it was not recognized. The star looked like it was floating, and especially when it's very far away from the favorite text. And then Kelsey had pointed out the different sizes of buttons. And so all of these, may not be buttons now that we're taking a closer look at it. Favorite, if I were to click on that, why is the shape very similar to the rest of these here? Is it meant to be a button? Is it supposed to be something else? Do these all perform different actions? Are these clickable? These are all questions that are popping into my head. Someone had pointed out the different typefaces that are used, again, outside of the usability principles, but still good to talk about as we're focused on UI design in this curriculum. And additional lines, is this necessary? Thinking about mental load, think about every unit here, every component or pattern is going to add visual weight to this design. So is this absolutely necessary? Do we need this? And then talk with Jason. Are we calling him? We're not sure. So definitely incorporating more human language would be helpful and specifying this. Wonderful. Okay. I would like to actually keep this as a group and keep going because I think this is really beneficial for everyone. So let's look at this next one that we have here. Another example work. What are some things that stick out that either violate or meet our usability principles?
The colors, my eyes, I can't. There are way too many colors.
Too many colors? Yes.
The icons on the bottom bar are not separated equally. There's more space between temperature, home and timers, and times and profile. My God.
I was gonna say the icons don't have consistency because two of them are line icons and two of them are solid icons.
They're filled, yeah.
And filled.
Yeah. I was going to say that the favorite cooks section is kind of confusing to me. And I think, I don't know, it's not too human of language. And so it's a little bit more recall than recognition. And so, yeah, because I'm just not too sure what the function is. Like, is this a favorite recipe? Something like that,
Yeah.
Also, there's some issues with the alignment for the words in the I guess I don't know what you would call these in the cards, and they could be like spaced a little bit further apart too, because they kind of look like they're bleeding into each other. Like there's no separation between them at all.
Oh, you can actually see. I guess if you zoom in a lot on the star on the smoked sirloin one, it's a little bit. It's like a pixel down, and you can see the red bleeding into the purple on top there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. It looks like they're just like stuck together.
I feel that like the margins are not the margins with the icons at the bottom versus what's inside of the screen are off. Yeah.
So
it's like a double logo going on too.
Double margin, double logo.
Yeah. I was confused by the double logo. Also, there's like that orange like clock button in the middle, and then there's also the times like clock down in the navigation like bar.
Yeah.
That feels like redundant, and I don't know if they're for the same thing and if they're for different things, like what those two different things are. That's really confusing.
Well, I think what's confusing is I think one is for you to check your times. And I think this is an assumption that the one that's up in the middle is for a stopwatch.
Oh.
But it's weird because the stopwatch is on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right? and then the clock is in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know on what page we're on either, too.
I don't know what we're doing. I have no idea what we're doing.
It's like
And
it is
not knowing on what page I am.
And
And
there
also, and also the degrees button right there. Like, what is that for?
And then there's temperature at the bottom as well. So
Yeah.
Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Oh, my guess, yeah, Fahrenheit and
Yeah.
Celsius.
But then there is
Yeah.
Changing.
that is exactly the same at the bottom. So what does that mean?
Right.
To understand what this is for. If
I think this is about telling you like cooking temperatures for like different meats, I think, and for how long you should cook something and what the temperature should be. Maybe.
But that's
so if that's the case, then yeah, I think that's what this app is.
So then, like, the favorite cooks text is confusing then, because I was thinking, oh, like chefs, but no, it's the temperature for the meat.
Knowing food, that sirloin is gonna be very dry.
Burnt, yes, it's going to be burnt.
180 degrees and 250. It's
gonna be shoe leather.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna be able to use it to patch a hole in a boat.
Awesome. So great things that were pointed out here. So I would say overall, this definitely has opportunity and trying to align with this principle of being aesthetic and following minimalist design. So there's a lot of different inconsistencies with the use of buttons that you all showcased and different colors. So it's, when you look at this for the first time, it's really difficult to draw your attention to where you should, what you should do first. Awesome. All right.
Inspired me to start a roast my design. Can you please do this?
If you all would like to do that in your free time, I think there's value in looking at other people's work. And also, I know it's hard to give other people feedback. I know you never want to feel like you're offending them, but this type of constructive feedback that you're all sharing, we should be this honest when we're reviewing our own work and when we're looking at other people's work. Never take to heart or never get defensive when someone's providing feedback. They mean well. It's what they think would be best. And you could always say no. You could always say, yeah, I'll try it out. Or you could say, I've already tried it out and it didn't work well. But yes, this type of honest feedback, like I encourage you all to make sure that you continue that, whether through roasts or however you'd like to set it up. Awesome. All right, let's look at this next example.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
What are some of the things that stand out here?
The green.
The contrast on this is it's bad.
I really like the buttons at the bottom because they make me think of like the epidermis, but then in green, and you can see like all the little divots and pores of your skin. Really
So,
good.
on what page are we on? Are we on settings or are we on Julie's recent recipes?
It looks like a profile page.
But there's settings too.
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I sort of feel like the tabs at the bottom are like almost too round. They look like little butts or something.
I mean, this is definitely lo-fi because there's not even icons on those buttons.
Lo-fi and language.
The rounded corners at the top are like throwing me off.
Yeah.
Too.
I don't understand.
And on the middle too. There's roundness everywhere.
I don't really understand why like the tabs seem unnecessary. Like, because if you're just gonna click on whatever the icons for those circles are gonna be, then
yeah,
I don't know why you need the tabs too.
It's definitely not clear what this page is.
I would have one thing to say, that even though, what was the thing, it's match between system and the real world, perhaps does not apply to the icons and all, but I would say that the settings are labeled, they're easy to understand, like I know what I'm gonna do. So that's like one thing, at least in that portion, is okay, I think. Not the rest of it though.
It looks like there's supposed to be lines and arrows there, I guess.
Yeah.
But you can't really see them.
I also don't like the text within the image.
Yeah. And like the blurred out. It's like, what's the point of having the image at all if you like can't see it?
That's a lie, by the way. French toast are not quick.
I definitely think it would make sense to put the like text like underneath the image or something, because that would just improve your clarity.
And I don't think the blurb on there is necessary either, because it's such a small space.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Rounded corners everywhere.
Rounds everywhere, man.
Well, they are consistent with it. I mean, I feel like it's bad design, but the roundness seem like there's consistency.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Well, I think they did the round. They probably did the round corner because this is like a recipe. So you know those. I don't know if I'm showing my age or not. You know those boxes that.
The dividers?
I know my grandma had one, yeah, with the recipe cards in it. So maybe that's what they're trying to portray at the bottom of the page because it's a recipe app.
I don't know though.
It doesn't make it right, but
my mom's and grandmother's I've never seen a recipe box that was this intensely green.
Oh my god!
Like I would have chosen like a different typeface if that's the energy I was going for that matter. I'm also like, so while the settings are really clear, this looks like it's supposed to be like a profile page, and I don't.
That's what I said.
Why the settings are?
Or a settings page. It's like she went, why not both?
Yeah.
So key themes, again, lack of aesthetics and minimalist design, use of these bright colors, these bright greens, these roundness of cards that we had pointed out. So they almost feel like the way that this is designed, that they're almost cards that you can slide, even though I don't believe that's the intention. The confusion between, it seems like a profile page, but then we have recent recipes and we have settings and then these tabs. So this is an example of breaking existing conventions. And so when you think about your tabs, use what exists out there today. What I think would have been better and more in line with our thought process is thinking about the bottom navigation bars that we typically see in web applications and mobile applications. Great. Awesome. All right, so let's take a look at one more.
Oh my god.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Only typeface.
Yeah, and the hierarchy is kind of off too.
I love Taylor Swift.
I mean, I do like the now playing artist right there and the up next artist thing. I like that.
But on first glance, this is very confusing because it's like, is this a Taylor Swift? I know this is not a Taylor. What I know, this is not a Taylor Swift and Nicki Minaj song. First of all, second of all, like I said, like on first glance, this is confusing until you start to like read the words. Because this just kind of looks like a picture of them together when you first see it.
Yeah.
Wait, so is the app name Listen Up?
I think so.
I think it says it's an all-women artist radio, so I think this is like a radio station, like website or something.
Mm-hmm. But this looks like an editorial photo, though.
there's no way to go back. There's no menu button. There's no other buttons than play forward and back.
Mm-hmm.
I would like their album cover, not their face body stuff. Quest, whatever you call this.
Oh, and if you look at the whatever the black line is,
It looks like it's lyrics.
The lyrics?
Oh no, it looks like the story of how she wrote the song.
Well,
Yeah.
if you look at the,
It looks like it's going to be a scroll bar too. Like it's going to be scrolling.
It's going to be moving by itself. Yeah.
Seems really distracting and probably going to be hard to read because of the script font or typeface.
yeah, and it
Especially how
actually
close it
goes
especially-
below the box too, the letters.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially how close it is to the other words, like up next and now playing.
So this would be maybe user control and freedom, and maybe error prevention, where you're not very clear on where you have to go and what would happen if you click on something. But those be the two major ones, the heuristic standards that those would fall under.
There were a lot. Go on.
There's a lot more.
Yeah. There's also no. There's.
Consistency, which.
Yeah, there's also like very minimal text hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like almost.
You mean like none?
Same size. Like shake it off, and I think the scrolling text is both slightly smaller than the rest of the text.
You know, it's funny that
usual...
in Spanish, that G, it's actually a Q, because the Q has a straight line.
Oh my goodness.
G has, so that's now playing.
Sonk while scrolling and seeing. Oh my god.
Well, I'm wondering if maybe actually the G does have a little loop. You just can't see it because the white box of the album cover cuts it off.
No, it doesn't, because you can see it like on seeing it. It's just a straight line.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It's missing a lot of play controls too, like repeat and shuffle.
I'm gonna take a picture of this boutique down the street from me that literally has this. Like, just everything about this right now. I
would also say that maybe the visibility of system status is also not very clear, because there's no difference between the now playing and the up next. They both seem like they're active. So that's one area perhaps that they could improve on too. And yeah, that was all.
Also, the P with listen up is cut off by the black bar.
Hey, what?
There's not no spacing between them.
Oh yeah, the same thing. So the black bar goes to the pink, and then the pink goes to the black bar. Cool. This is you kind of have to fire this designer kind of situation.
Awesome. All right. Great work, everyone. Great pieces that you were able to pull out here. Okay, so let's do this. Let's take a look at our assignment for this afternoon. And then if we have extra time, let's take a look at daily UIs. All right, so your assignment is available in Training Kit. And if we go into heuristic evaluation, design ethics, what I'll have you focused on as part of your afternoon assignment. So just to recap, heuristic evaluations are a practical method to evaluate a user interface design at any stage during the design process. And in a professional setting, this type of evaluation will help us identify user experience problems. So for the first part of your assignment, we are going to do just what we did just now. You're going to collect 3 screenshots that violate the usability principles and list the set or sets of heuristics used to conduct the analysis. With each issue, make a recommendation. And then you will go ahead and collect 3 screenshots that follow good examples of usability principles, and with each screenshot, list the set or sets of heuristics used to conduct the analysis. Questions on the first part of the assignment?
Sorry, screenshots of what? Like
anything that you find on the website, apps that you interact with, websites. It could even be your own work. So you are free to use whichever screenshots.
Okay. All right.
Other questions? All right. Okay, so for the second half of your assignment, I am going to make sure you have time to take care of your Build Week project. So as a reminder, yesterday morning, I had mentioned that we have our Build Week kickoff right after our Sprint Q&A on Friday. And what we should have ready by end of Thursday are our user flows that align with our MVP, ensuring that our style guide is up to date, making sure that we have our lo-fi mobile and desktop screens, and then making sure that we're converting those over into high fidelity. So if you don't have everything converted into high fidelity on Thursday, you will have time next week, but let's try to get as much as we can get done prior to kickoff. And then on kickoff, you will have to present your work. So there will be a module on Thursday about stakeholder presentations. You will have time to put that together, but I just wanted to share that as a reminder. And then just other reminders, prototype your screens. This is going to really help your team understand how the flow works and continue to make sure that your file is organized. For your submission, you're going to include screenshots, or it can just be a link to your Figma board. That's fine. But screenshots that violate the usability principles along with a summary, and then 3 screenshots that represent good usability along with its own individual summary, and a link to your Figma board with updates made to your Build Week project. As far as the rubric, one thing that is different is this heuristic evaluation that you're all assigned for this afternoon. So making sure that you are identifying 3 screenshots, like we talked about, that violates usability principles, 3 that meet, and that you have a submission that includes its respectful summary. And then everything else is familiar to you all: visual and text hierarchy, making sure that we're focusing on spacing and alignment as we convert our high fidelity to, or lo-fi to high fidelity, that we're using a color system that complements with one another, that we're using type that is legible. So think back to all of the examples that we were just looking at and taking a look at these designs with a fresh pair of eyes. Take that back to your own designs and see if there are things that you can make improvements on. This is all going to be part of your Build Week rubric that you'll be graded on next week. And then continuing to make sure that your file is organized. So some files I've seen where you have, actually I'll show an example. There's some files I've seen where folks have actually split out, for example, their master components, perhaps they have wireframes. And then I have other folks that are just leaving everything on one page. Organization is going to be really important. So if you could make sure that everything is separated out, so that way when somebody comes in, especially a developer or another team member, they're not scrolling around trying to understand everything. So just try to keep your file organized. Creating separate pages has been a really, really good best practice. And your master components really should be living on a separate page so you don't get them confused with your instances. Are there any questions on setting up and organizing our Figma boards, or any questions on the rubric or assignment that I can answer?
I have a really quick question. I'm not so sure if there's a solution within Figma, but I have a really difficult time keeping older iterations of my work. Is there a way to maybe select the page and the only way that I can think about it is just making sure all the instances are detached. That way it's not being updated. But then some of those are like really nested where I might, detach like the main instance but then inside would be another one that I forgot to do so, and it still gets updated. So is there a way to maybe select the whole page and just detach it? Or what would be a better way to keep older versions? Other than making like a duplicate copy, like if I wanted to keep it the same file with one page version 1, page 2 version 2, and so on, what would be the good practice?
Yeah, so the best thing that you can do is save it with version history, but that may be limited depending on whether you have a subscription to Figma or not. If you do have access to version history, you can always save it and say this is like iteration
I can
but I can't
go
have it
through.
like visible like all the time where I can just simply go, like I'm aware of the version history, but then I would like to see it like in pages, like I guess I can just drop an image there and off like a,
Just make copies, just copy them over.
I'm sorry?
Create a new page if you want to do it in page and be like date or whatever, and then just literally copy it over and then just keep working on your high fidelity as it's changing.
Yeah, but then the bad is that if I update my components, then even if it is a copy,
export them. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think exporting might be, like I can save it to version history and just for my record, I could export an image and keep that in my pages.
I can kind of help you during our one-on-one go through.
Oh, okay.
I know what you're talking about.
It's just really messy. I have like 10 different files that I would like to sort of combine all of them into one really neatly organized.
So
yeah.
I think I know where that could have changed a little bit, like having a low fidelity. I think because your low fidelity boards they have components on them, so that you're just updating your components and then it changes everything.
Yeah.
So I think having an established low fidelity component thing first, and then having an established page for high fidelity components, so that they're separated. It's not just like you're using the same exact components, and then just pushing them into high fidelity. I can go through with
okay, that'd be nice.
Our one-on-one.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thanks.
One thing I wanted to mention though, about the whole incognito thing and how the devs don't really know about Figma too much. I don't know if you were going to mention that or not.
Not yet, but we can talk about it now. That's fine.
Okay. Sorry. You want me to say it? Or do you?
It does. Go ahead, Ash. You got it.
Okay. I was sharing with my group how like the devs don't necessarily know what Figma is. And so like when you say, okay, here's my Figma, they're not going to really know what that means unless you explain it to them. They don't know what Figma is, not necessarily, unless they have some kind of design background. And so if you go and create a share link for your Figmas and go open it up in an incognito browser, it'll look totally different from how you see it now. And so like that's what they're going to see when they open it up. So if you open it up in some other window and just like this, it'll look totally different. And it'll prompt them to make an account and whatnot. And so they'll have to make an account to be able to see your thing. Oops.
I might not be able to do that just because I have an account that appears.
You want me to do it? I can do it if you want.
Oh yeah, that'd be great if you have that.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so when you create a copy link, right, you want to make sure it says can edit, and then I'm not logged in on Google Chrome, so I just paste it in there, and then this is what it'll look like to your devs, like this. And so you see how like there's no side panel on either side. And this might look really confusing because it's just going to show them your first page. So So just kind of walking them through Figma and saying, okay, well, it's really easy to, create an account really quick so you can have access, and then you can show them this, and then they could see the different pages, and whatnot. And then you can say, okay, well, once you have an account, then you can go in and, you can click on components, and then this is where, and then you can kind of go through it. So like, this is where our user flow is, and you can go in here and take a look at it, like whenever you want. And then you can go, this is our master component area. And if you need any button or sizing or dimensions, you can go in here and click on this, and then it'll all be on the side. And just kind of like explaining what all these pages are, and then walk through like, your flow and whatever, and having it organized, and kind of just saying, okay, let's just go through it, and then just go page by page and talk through it. And then just reminding them, like, just try to be careful when you're clicking on things, because they're going to want to click on things like this and push option, or you can tell them this to hold on option. It kind of shows like the distance away too. If they probably won't know how to do that, but just selecting this, getting your cursor out and holding down option allows to see where it's at, and whatnot. But anyways, like, just explaining to them like the benefit of creating an account so that they could see all of the work and the components and everything in one space, and it's a collaborative tool and whatnot. So that was just my only recommendation that y'all do, and whatnot. But that's it.
Thanks, Ash. Any questions for Ash on that, or any questions on the assignment or rubric?
So on what are we doing the assignment on? Any website or any website?
You can, if you'd like, it could be one website where you pick 6 screenshots. That's fine. So it could be a variety. There's other daily UIs that are taking place. If you'd like to hop into those and pull those, I'll leave that up to your discretion as to what you'd like to use to evaluate the work.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And Melissa, you need to use three different bad examples and then 3 good examples. It can't be the same shot and you talk about good examples and bad examples in there.
You can use the same shot. If they overlap and there's a good example and a bad example, that is okay. Other questions? Awesome. All right, I know we didn't get a chance to go into daily UIs, so please, I love that some of you are starting to add context to what you've designed, so continue to do that. That helps me out. So if I were to go in and provide feedback, I understand where you're coming from. And so when I get some time, I'm going to dive into these and ask for your feedback. Other than that, thanks for a great class. Enjoy your lunch, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.